I'll start off with a little bit of context. Who is this guy? Who am I? My name is Brian. I started my career as a software engineer, 10 years in the US, building defense applications as well as e-commerce applications. I then took what was meant to be a one-month holiday to Australia and spent the next decade working for one of the large banks in Australia in banking and finance, ANZ. And then wanted to come, I spent the last 2 years of that tenure in Singapore. I wanted to go back to Australia and got the opportunity to go to work for RMIT University, which is Australia's largest tertiary organization, one of the largest higher ed providers on the Big Island. And now I'm a curriculum management evangelist, not necessarily, I guess it was by choice, but it was also because I saw a problem that throughout my career, either in defense, e-commerce, banking and finance, I see problems. I like to try and solve them if someone else hasn't already solved it. A little bit more about me. I'm also an amateur under 10 girls basketball coach, amateur barista, and amateur cyclist. Was really keen to see, I did a walk around before and had a look at a lot of the bikes in the bike shops. Love what Amsterdam does for cycling. I started about 4 years ago a company called Factor5. And we really focused in on curriculum management. So who are we as a company? We, as I said, we're based in Australia. We have 9 of Australia's 40 universities using our CourseLoop curriculum management solution. We've recently won our first UK client. We think the UK market is a really interesting space for us. We're headquartered in Melbourne, and we're about 50 employees. I promise you I'm not going to sell you today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our journey, tell you our story. Maybe it resonates, maybe it doesn't. I will give you our logo. These are our universities. You might recognize some of the names if you work with the Australian. I was talking to someone today that offers dual degrees with Monash, which was our anchor client. So we spent a lot of time really understanding this problem and living it with academics and professional staff. So we really started this journey kind of at the end of my story, really, which was yesterday. Jane talked about curriculum management, if you were in that session, and she talked about the ability to share that information with students and really engage them in a process of their academic journey. And so we started looking at that as well. And we saw that what universities were providing was a lot of this. I still remember I went looking for it in preparation for this presentation, a 17-page PDF that explained the options of a bachelor's degree in nutrition science for one of the universities we had looked at. And I read this thing, and I'm a reasonably intelligent guy, and I'm like, I would have no idea what choices to make. And when we talked to this university, we said, well, what does a student want to do? What does a student do if they want to have some help in working out what choices they should make in this degree program? Well, they pick up the phone and they call an advisor. And we started looking at that and say, well, what's the problem here? What's the underlying fundamental issue? We really wanted to make this engagement, create this engagement between the student and the curriculum, right? So in Australia in particular, and again, this may or may not resonate, a lot of choices. Someone mentioned humanities yesterday in one of the sessions I was in. Bachelor of Arts at Monash has 40 different specializations or 40 different majors or minors, and lots of interesting variations that can be created. And we want to engage students in that process. But what we found was all the rules and all the data to do that was sitting in Word documents or spreadsheets or Access databases or multiple databases. And we really saw that as a problem, and it ultimately resulted in a poor student and staff experience. When I was the CIO at RMIT, we looked at this problem. We did some analysis across the university, not just the data management problem, but also the governance and approval problem. And I just, coming from banking and finance and probably being a little naive, I thought, well, this is like product lifecycle management. I think you mentioned yesterday, Jane, that programs and courses are universities' products. If you think about it in a commercial term, I thought, well, someone's solved this problem. So we went out to market in 2013 looking for what we perceived to be an end-to-end solution, and we didn't see anything in the market. So being a little bit entrepreneurial, I thought, well, let's create a solution because someone really needs to solve this in an end-to-end way. My background, software engineering, software architecture. I love models. My favorite quote about models is all models are wrong, but some are useful. So we set out to build ourselves a useful model and to really facilitate the conversation with universities in this domain. And what did we mean by curriculum management versus what someone else might mean in this space. And so we really broke it down into kind of four critical areas. The first of that is the academic design or the program design. How do programs and courses hang together? What's the rules? What's the structure around that? And in particular, how do you map those relationships? So how do you map program intended learning outcomes down to maybe major learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, assessments, learning activities, creating all of that, whether that's for a professional accreditation process, or in Australia's universities are self-accrediting, so they need to demonstrate themselves to a government body that those things actually hang together. And it's good quality design. The second then is that approval process. So once you've made your program and course design changes, or you want to implement changes, how do you govern that process? And this was an area that we had looked at pretty deeply at the university that I was at. Well, I like to tell the joke, we had 23 schools, but about 32 different ways to get programs and courses approved. And so there was a lot of manual process, there was a lot of paper, a lot of meeting agendas and minutes coming out to work out, did my changes get approved or not? Ultimately, then you want to implement that, right? The whole point of managing your curriculum is that you want to put it in the hands of students, you want to put it downstream into the rest of your system, the rest of your organization, and then ultimately engage the students and staff in that. We also think there's a continuous improvement. I dare say I've heard a couple of the talks over the last couple of days talking about program review and that cycle of continually revising programs and courses. And then ultimately, there's a lot of data that's generated from this process, right? So there's a lot of underlying data, and how do you gain insight from that? And not just from the curriculum, but the delivery of the curriculum. How do you close the loop and come back to this information and have it impact and affect and improve your design processes? So really using that model, we built 4 applications: program and course design, workflow and governance, implementation, publishing, integration downstream. Being an architect, I think that ultimately from a system perspective, you should have a curriculum management system of record, but that needs to feed your student information system, that needs to feed your learning management system, it needs to feed your data warehouse. So from an integration perspective, we think that's critical. And then ultimately, how do you manage the student's path through their degree? So once they've chosen a program and you've got all the rules and all the course information available to you, how do you help them through that process? And ultimately, sitting on top of that, again, I've got a software architecture and software engineering background. I ultimately think this needs to sit on a platform. So if we look at the marketplace today as an organization, we see a number of point solutions, standalone point solutions that can be integrated. That takes a reasonable amount of work. My view is you build this on a consistent platform with a common data model and a common set of functions, and you can build out the functionality on top of it. And we were having this conversation earlier today. Functionality is one thing, but actually having the common data model and actually building on top of a common data platform is, I think, critical. I hate the term best practice. I think one thing that's unique about our organization is that the vast majority of us haven't been in the vendor side of this game our entire careers. The vast majority of us have sat on your side of the table and actually been in organizations implementing and struggling with these sort of problems. And so when vendors would say to me, we've got best practice, I would go, according to whom and how many people? Is it a survey, a sample size of one? Or, is it, okay, that might be your experience in the US, but what's your experience in Australia or in Europe or in Asia? And so I won't tell you this is best practice, I'll tell you this is our experience. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and this is all we do is worry about curriculum management and help organizations improve their curriculum management. So these are kind of, I guess, our experiences. And if they're useful to you, that's great. So starting out, establish a structured curriculum model with a robust data, a set of rules and data baseline. And so we've got, I think, a very extensive curriculum management repository, data model. We were a campus solution shop, and as a CIO in a campus solution shop, the rigidity of the data model and the things that we couldn't do because of the way campus ran, not having to go at campus, it was just an experience that I learned in terms of both what we could configure about the environment as well as just the data structure. We took some of those learnings into the way we designed our data model and also just the configuration approach to our application. And my intent of that commercially was to go, well, university to university is going to be different, right? What we found is even within universities, that flexibility within a single university where you've got one faculty who may want to do something this way or another faculty who wants to do it that way, that's actually lent itself to solving that problem as well. Define and implement a nimble and diligent governance model. I stole nimble and diligent governance model from the provost at Monash when we were first working on this problem with her. She wanted the right level of governance, and people can get carried away when you start doing workflows. And we had one client who legitimately said to us they had 900 workflows they wanted to implement in CourseLoop, and we just went, "That's ridiculous." I think we got down to 13 in the end, and I still think that was too many. So talk a little bit about that. Making use of approved curriculum information across the institution. I think this is the real value of curriculum management. Unfortunately, it's a little bit like you got to eat your vegetables before you can have dessert. And ultimately, I think the dessert is the student engagement and that student experience side. But you got to do the work to get the data model and to get the foundations in place to then get the benefits of that. And using the information across the institution, I think, is critical. Everyone likes to talk about single source of truth. I used to say those same words. I now talk about a definitive source of truth, because ultimately you want the source of truth to be in your student information system and your LMS and anywhere else. You want it to be the truth. You just want it to come from a definitive source. Model and map deep curriculum relationships. So a couple of things that go on in the Australian marketplace that, again, may or may not resonate with you. But in the Australian institutions, being able to demonstrate that the 24 courses that make up a bachelor's degree, that those things go together and result in the student meeting the learning outcomes of the program, mapping that's important, and showing those relationships and showing, at what level are they. Maybe first year courses are introducing some of those concepts, and third year courses should be mastering those. And so mapping those relationships, we talk about the data model from our perspective. We take a high cohesion, low coupling approach. If you're into software architecture, it's a pretty important principle. Very few people actually apply it, but our ability to map relationships across the model is pretty strong, because we see that whether you're mapping to professional accreditation standards or you're just mapping the course learning outcomes to the assessments in that course. You need to be able to create those relationships. And then engaging students in the curriculum for success. So I think this is I won't say it's the holy grail, but it's really where we started and the ultimate problem we wanted to solve. And when we really dug into it, we saw there was a fair bit of foundation work that needed to be done first. So dig into that a little bit more. If you want to use this information, and I do think, apart from the student experience, using this information across your organization is really important. I came into the education sector in 2011 from banking and finance, and quickly went through what I called sector shock in terms of what was and wasn't happening coming from banking and finance, a decade of workflow and automation and getting manual processes out of the organization, to finding quite a lot of the organization running on manual processes and paper. Getting a really structured data model, I think, is foundational here. And that's from the structure itself and the rules that go around a program structure to the individual learning outcomes. So if we take, I think every client that we've worked with so far, their learning outcomes are a paragraph of text with maybe 1 to 10 bullet points. And getting those into structured atomic items in the data model allow you to do things like create those mapped relationships and look at them as individual entities and potentially share them and expand on them as you build your program. So I think for us, I can't overemphasize getting that structured data model, and whether it's in CourseLoop or it's in another product or it's in Build Your Own, that's fundamentally, in my view, having lived this problem in depth for 4+ years, and only this, that's the foundational step in my mind. And maybe that's just because I have a data background on it. Then you need to make sure it's current, and that it's the right version. So even clients that we've gone into where they might have done something in an Access database or they might have done something in a spreadsheet, you discover that, that's not the latest approved one because that's still coming through the Word documents in the committee and hasn't been updated in the database. And so keeping that current and managing the workflow managing that approval process is critical. And again, I guess coming from a software engineering background and driving configuration and change, having this be flexible for an organization, being able to drive the workflow we have in our product dynamic workflow engine, so you kind of define if you're changing these parts of a program or those parts of a program, then that might go through one approval workflow. If you're changing learning outcomes, for instance, that's probably something that needs to go right up to one of the highest levels of approval. I fundamentally have a view that technology shouldn't change the way you work, in the sense that you shouldn't have to work around the technology. And so we spend a lot of time with our clients, and even before they're our clients, working out what's the real world like. And so by way of example, the actual approval authority based on whatever you delegate inside your organization is a separate role to someone who can move something through the workflow. And the reason for that is that we find the person moving the thing through the workflow is often not the person who actually has the delegated authority, but the delegated authority stamp needs to come at some point, right? And that might need to come before the thing actually goes to your Senate or your academic board or whatever your final approval authority is. And those decisions were reached by working with people in real world scenarios, and a lot of us going, tell us how it actually happens. That was inspired by my experience, particularly working with SAP leave approvals. If anyone has SAP in here, and having to approve leave in SAP, it always just sort of gets delegated. Make use of the approved curriculum across the institution. So again, if you've invested in getting the right robust data model in place, and then you've got a nice governance process over it to keep it current, manage the changes, manage the workflow and the governance, then you're going to want to use it. And for us, there's two places that we think you should be using. Certainly our clients tell us they need to be using it. One is publishing that out to the students. So being able to publish that, whether that's in a handbook or a curriculum catalog or whatever you call it, it's the program and courses that your institution offers. But it's also about being able to push it out through an API. And so every object in our data model is accessible via REST API. So we have full JSON access to everything. And it's all documented in the platform in terms of being able to access it and be able to see the examples of the records. I think, again, because most of us have lived inside an institution where we've had to integrate offerings from other suppliers, this was a critical point for us in terms of being able to say, it's your data, you've managed it, you've got it, you can use it anywhere you want. And there's an event system for managing when things come through. Is if you want to trigger a particular event off of one data item changing or a particular approval in the workflow, any event in the system can trigger that. Now we found that, again, really useful to integrate with SIS and learning management systems. They seem to be the two biggest ones, though there is an ongoing discussion about timetabling, and we all know the pains and problems of timetabling. I'd like to be able to make it better, but I don't want to step into timetabling just yet. I guess the next step then is model and map these deep relationships. So what do we mean when we say relationships? So we manage and we think about really 4 different types of relationships. So the first is the structural relationship, the rules between programs, majors and minors that are available in those programs, and courses. And also we have modules as a sub-level. So we do a lot of short course and individual sort of co-curricular stuff as a module. But being able to structurally create those relationships is kind of the foundation relationship type that we talk about. The second is a requisite relationship between a course and another course. And we also have enrollment rules. So if you have a relationship between a course, you can only enroll in this course. If you're admitted to a particular program, you can create those sort of relationships. The third is really this association, which is allows you to create relationships between degrees. One of our clients uses that to create, if you like this degree, these are 4 or 5 other things that might be of interest to you because they're in a similar discipline. And then the fourth is really, I think, probably the most powerful in terms of being able to create mapped relationships for the assurance of learning, constructive alignment across the curriculum. And so Australia, unless you're a PeopleSoft Campus Solutions university in Australia, you most likely call your curriculum items courses and subjects or courses and units. If you are a Campus Solutions, you will call them programs and courses. from a product perspective, we're totally configurable. So course learning outcomes to unit learning outcomes, that's a Australian example. Being able to map the actual assessments that realize those or deliver on those unit learning outcomes, even back up to then standards or graduate attributes. But creating those mapped relationships, I think is quite critical. And then even, what level of attainment is, if you're introducing a program learning outcome in a first level course, is it introducing that? Are you mastering it? Are you developing it? You can support Blooms in that if you're particularly Blooms oriented, but it's from our perspective, from a software perspective, that's again configurable because every university wants something different, and even our clients from faculty, this faculty uses Blooms, this one has their own taxonomy, these guys have modified Blooms, and so we deal with all that. And again, ultimately then sort of building out what's that relationship down to the actual delivery of the course. Building on the foundations and the structured data enables the cool stuff, because I really think this is the interesting problem to solve. And like I said, I think what's exciting for us as an organization is I think we've done the work now to get to this problem area and actually be able to build that engagement. So we've designed and haven't yet developed, but we have user tested with a number of our university students, our client students, effectively, call it what you want, degree planner, study planner. It's as an individual student, I'm in the Bachelor's of Science with the major in marine biology. What are my requirements? And maybe I was admitted 2 years ago, so what were the requirements then? Because those are the ones that I'm subject to, and having that version history helps us do that. But then what choices do I start to make in terms of my major, in terms of potentially electives, and then what do the rules of the curriculum mean in my particular case? And we see this very much as a progression tool as well, which says, okay, I'm actually now in my second year, so get all the student information systems completion data and tick off all the ones I've already done, and then show me what's remaining. And then the ability to sort of look at that at, I guess, a more granular level for courses in terms of week-by-week activity, managing that, individual assessments, and getting kind of right up to the delivery side. I mean, in simple terms, when I looked at this problem domain, again, I like models. I like simple models. I said, universities, if you take out research, we're all talking about coursework, the universities are either designing the curriculum or they're delivering it. And there was a lot of stuff happening in delivery, right? So there was investments in learning management systems, flipped classrooms, all of this stuff going on in delivery, and I saw nothing really robust, I thought, going on this design side. So we really want to kind of play right up to that space and then integrate into the delivery side. And we think there's a lot of opportunity. We see, again, kind of a reasonable gap between what's going on in governance in universities and what's going on in actually delivering the day-to-day in the classroom. So that's kind of our approach. This is the way we think about this space. This has been our journey over the last 4 years. We're kind of at that top bar now, and that's really exciting for us. I did do a talk a while back on micro-credentials. I don't know if it's important, if that's heating up. I think there's a lot of I should be quiet. I think there's a lot of hype in this space. I'll just say it. Certainly a lot of hype in this space in the U.S., but I think there's a lot of reality to it as well. And so, particularly in the post-grad and the CPE or CPD space. But in terms of micro-credentialing and looking at this, we're starting to work with a couple of our clients. This was one of my favorite slides. Is what are micro-credentials? So it's one of these things where everyone's got maybe a slightly different point of view. And this was just what are they? I actually think the University of Melbourne, there's more of these. I grabbed a bunch when I was doing this slide, obviously. Oh yeah, it keeps going. I think University of Melbourne, they're doing some work in this space from a learning and teaching perspective, not necessarily delivery of micro-credentials, but actually looking at the education side of this. And I thought they had some really interesting stuff. So check out Melbourne Uni or if you're interested. But my foundational view on this is, if you want to do micro-credentialing, it's a form of curriculum management, right? There's an overlay from this perspective. We're doing a lot of work going back to that mapping learning outcomes to assessments. And I think, Jane, you mentioned, starting to tag some of those things as competencies, and what are some of the keywords in those learning outcomes? What are some of the capabilities? And so we think having that robust foundation first and foremost in the data model, and then having those relationships over the top. It doesn't have to be learning outcome to assessment relationships. It can actually be tagging some of these capabilities which turn into micro-credentials. And I actually think there's an opportunity, once you've got that robust sort of structure and the relationships in place, the ability to mine some of that. And I don't like to throw around AI and machine learning. Everyone likes these sort of buzzwords, but there are a few places where I start to go, well, actually, once you've got that model and you've got the relationship, you can actually start to do some analytics, is what it really is, but you can actually start to run some algorithms over and start to surface some of that. And I think, again, from our perspective, we're always looking at what can we do to help the organization? How can we add value in this space? And so I think there is an interesting sort of bonus opportunity in that area. And that's me.